The silence of Oakhaven wasn't the silence of a town asleep. It was the silence of a town holding its breath. I'd driven 300 miles to get here, a city man in a new, uncomfortable kind of quiet. I was a journalist, on a mission to document ancient rural traditions. My editor had called it a quaint piece on folklore. What I found was anything but. The village was a cluster of stone houses tucked deep in a valley, with a single winding road that was little more than a dirt track. The people were polite, but their eyes were wary, their smiles not quite reaching the empty spaces behind them. Every door in the village was marked with the same intricate carving, a swirling symbol of leaves and branches, a sigil I couldn't place. I chalked it up to local art, a charming but primitive superstition. My days were spent in the village archives, poring over old journals that chronicled the town's history. The entries were filled with a strange, repetitive lexicon. The harvest was bountiful this year, for the dues were paid. The warden of the woods smiled upon us. The green man accepts our offerings. I wrote it off as old-timey language, a flowery way of talking about farming. But some of the older journals spoke of the dues in chilling terms, hinting at human sacrifice to ensure the crop. I dismissed it as a forgotten dark past, not a current practice. The first personal sign was an effigy. I found it on my doorstep one morning, a small, intricate carving of a man with his limbs twisted into a knot, his face a silent scream. It was made of wood, woven with real leaves and twigs. My heart was thudding, but when I showed it to the innkeeper, his face paled and he told me it was just a greeting. The villagers now looked at me with a strange mix of pity and fear. I was no longer an observer. I was a part of their story. The woods surrounding the village, once a peaceful backdrop, now felt menacing. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like long, skeletal fingers. I started to notice the scarecrows in the fields. There were more than there should be, and they were too real. Their faces carved from gourds seemed to follow me, and their forms draped in rags looked too much like human bodies, their limbs bent at unnatural angles. I now knew the symbols on the doors weren't decorations. They were a lock, a ward to keep something in. It all came to a head on the night of the harvest festival. The entire village gathered at the edge of the woods, their faces bathed in the light of torches. Their low chanting was unlike anything I had ever heard, a guttural hymn in a language that felt older than time. An offering was brought forward, a small white calf, its eyes wide with fear. The chanting rose to a frenzied, desperate wail, and the calf was taken into the woods. But as the villagers fell silent, their eyes turned to me, and I saw a new kind of hunger in their gaze. This was not the end of the ritual. It was just the beginning. I ran. My car was in the village square, and as I fumbled with the key, a chill went through me. The wires had been cut. I looked up to see a gaunt-faced man, Gerald, the village elder I had interviewed. His eyes were not wary now. They were filled with a terrifying ancient sadness. "You should not have stayed," he whispered, his voice as dry as dead leaves. "The dues must be paid. We have given what we could from the soil and the herd, but the harvest demands more, a soul from outside, a new seed for the green man." I didn't wait for him to finish. I bolted for the only escape, the woods. The trees were a black, unforgiving maze, and behind me I could hear the villagers, their chanting now, a terrifying hunt. I wasn't running from people. I was running from a force of nature. I ran until I collapsed, gasping for air, and I saw them. The scarecrows. They weren't rag dolls. They were the bodies of the past sacrifices, their limbs woven into the branches of the ancient trees. Their faces, no longer carved gourds, were human skulls, their mouths open in a silent scream. The forest was not a forest. It was a cathedral of death, a monument to a malevolent ancient god. The chanting from the village was just a distant hum now, but a new sound filled the air. A low, mournful whisper on the wind, a sound of rustling leaves and creaking branches that said, "I am the forest, and you are mine." I saw it then. A form taller than any man made of intertwining branches and dense foliage. It had a humanoid shape but no face, only a core of swirling cold green light. The warden of the wood, the Green Man. It was not a myth. It was real, and it was coming for me. My survival was not possible. I was a part of the harvest, and the dues were now to be paid. As the trees closed around me, I felt the earth take root inside my chest, and I knew I would walk these woods forever. Now, a silent offering. I was drawn to the moor by rumor. Scholars whispered of a village that existed out of time, a place that vanished and reappeared with the fog, where the old ways were not just remembered, but enforced. I told myself it was research, academic curiosity. In truth, I was desperate to find something extraordinary, a story that would outshine the mundane papers of my career. The moor was endless, a gray sea of grass and heather. The wind cut through my coat and seemed to carry voices, soft murmurs that vanished when I turned my head. When I finally saw the village, it was like stepping into a painting. Stone cottages huddled together, chimneys smoking, but the streets were deserted. I called out, but my voice died on the wind. A boy appeared from behind a wall, barefoot and pale, holding a wicker basket. He stared at me with eyes too old for his face. "The mist is coming," he said. "You shouldn't be here." I laughed nervously. "I'm here to learn, to watch." He shook his head. "It'll watch you first." Before I could ask what he meant, the villagers appeared. They moved silently like shadows stepping out of walls. Their clothing was simple, homespun, and their faces were expressionless. A woman older than the rest stepped forward. She carried a carved wooden staff topped with a twisted knot of roots. "You've come to see the ceremony," she said, voice like dry leaves. "Do you wish to join?" I nodded. I had to. My curiosity outweighed reason. Night fell suddenly. Thick fog rolling across the moor, swallowing the cottages. The villagers gathered in a circle around a stone altar overgrown with moss. On the altar lay a bundle wrapped in animal skin. A child's laughter echoed through the fog, though I could see no one. My stomach twisted. The ceremony began. The villagers chanted in a language that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The air vibrated with it, low and thrumming. It wasn't just sound, it was a command shaping the fog itself. It writhed and thickened, forming shapes that resembled faces, twisting in pain or laughter. I couldn't tell which. The woman with the staff raised it high. From the bundle on the altar, a single root emerged, black and glistening, writhing like a snake. It grew, spreading across the altar, then the ground merging with the fog, the stones, the very earth beneath my feet. The villagers pressed their hands to it, murmuring, and I understood. This was not worship. It was feeding, and it demanded life. I turned to leave, but the village had shifted. The streets twisted unnaturally, the cottages leaning toward me like gaping mouths. Every direction I took brought me back to the circle. Panic clawed at me, and the root's whispers entered my mind. Not words, just a rhythm, a pulse that echoed through my skull. It wanted me. The villagers approached, not angrily, not cruelly. They moved as if led by instinct, drawn by the same need that pulsed through the root. One of them spoke in a voice that was not his own. "You have come. You will stay." I screamed, but the sound was swallowed. The root slithered up my legs, cold, wet. It pressed into my chest, and in an instant, I could see everything. The village, the moor, the fog itself, all alive, all conscious. The villagers were not alive in the way I understood. They were extensions, conduits, feeding and guiding the root. And now I was one of them, or would be, unless I tore myself apart from the inside. I tried to resist. My thoughts spun, desperate and incoherent. The root pulsed with impatience, brushing against my mind like tendrils. I felt my identity stretch and fray, pieces of me merging with the soil, the fog, the very essence of the moor. I was not human anymore, or if I was, it was fleeting. The villagers chanted louder. The fog thickened into a living wall. Faces screaming and laughing passed behind it. And then, in the heart of the circle, I saw my own face pressed against the mist, pale and terrified, screaming in silence. My body twitched and fell to its knees, hands pressed to the root. It thundered with satisfaction. I understood, in that final instant, that the village didn't take people. It claimed them. It was older than fear, older than memory, and it would survive as long as there were wanderers drawn by curiosity, by arrogance, by the hunger for stories. And I had brought myself willingly. When the fog lifted, the circle was empty. No trace of me remained. But somewhere in the whispering wind across the moor, my voice carries still, calling to the next curious soul. I grew up in Ashcombe, though I've never said it proudly. It's a village tucked so deep into the hills that maps forget it. Outsiders only come when they're lost, and even then, they rarely stay long. Not because the people are unkind, but because of the silence. It presses against you here, thick and damp like the air before a storm. There was always the bell, not a church bell, though we had one of those too. No, the Bell of Ashcombe hung in the square, iron black, green with centuries of moss. It was older than the chapel, older than the cobbled streets, older, some whispered, than the village itself. My grandfather used to say it was pulled from the earth during the first plowing of the fields, dug up whole as if the land had been keeping it hidden. No rope was ever tied to it, no hand ever dared strike it. It simply stood there silent. Until it rang. The first time I heard it, I was 12. A Sunday morning fog curling low through the lanes. The chapel bell had just finished its hollow toll when the Bell of Ashcombe answered. No hand moved, no hammer struck, but it sounded, low and resonant, as if the ground itself had groaned. My mother froze with a pot in her hands. My father dropped his bread. And then, without a word, every villager walked to the square. I didn't understand. I followed, shivering in the mist, to see a boy no older than 6, standing by the bell. He wasn't from the village. His clothes were too clean, his face too soft, his eyes too wide with fear. He must have wandered in from the hills lost. The elders said nothing, only placed hands on his shoulders and led him away. We never saw him again. When I asked, my father cuffed me across the ear so hard I couldn't hear for hours. He whispered, "We do what keeps us safe." And that was the end of it. Years passed. I left Ashcombe for work, for a wife, for a life where bells tolled for ordinary reasons. But last autumn, after my father's death, I returned. The cottage was mine, and though my wife begged me not to go back, I felt the pull. A duty, maybe, or something darker. It was October, and the mist seemed thicker than I remembered, clinging like damp wool. The villagers looked older, thinner, their eyes hollowed out by years of waiting. The bell still stood in the square, untouched by time, humming faintly when the wind shifted. I swore I felt it vibrating in my bones. On my 3rd night back, it rang. I knew before it happened. My sleep was broken by dreams of roots burrowing through my chest, of soil filling my mouth, of a hollow ringing echoing through my skull. And then, there it was. That sound, that impossible groan. The villagers filed silently into the square, candles flickering in the mist. At the bell's base stood a woman, young, pale, her clothes sodden with rain. She looked like she'd walked for miles, lost, hungry, an outsider. The elders took her gently by the arms. She screamed, begged, fought, but it didn't matter. They carried her to the chapel. I followed, unable to stop myself. In the crypt beneath the chapel, I saw what my father had tried to keep from me. The floor was bare earth, like a wound that never healed. The bell's tone still throbbed through the stone above us. The woman was lowered into the soil, her cries muffled as the earth drank her down. Not buried, absorbed. I swear I saw the roots twitch, reaching for her, wrapping around her limbs, dragging her deeper. The villagers prayed, but not to God. Their words were old, broken, syllables that scraped the throat like gravel. When it was over, the soil was smooth again, the crypt silent. The elders bowed their heads. "Another year," one whispered. That night, I couldn't sleep. My father's words came back. A poison. We do what keeps us safe. Safe from what? The mist? The roots? The thing beneath Ashcombe? I pressed my ear to the floorboards, and I swear I heard it breathing. Now I sit here, writing this by candlelight. The bell has rung again, louder this time. The villagers are gathering. But tonight, there is no outsider, no lost soul wandering in. With a clarity that freezes my veins, I now understand why I felt the pull to return. It wasn't grief or duty, or even nostalgia. It was the bell. It has chosen, and the soil is waiting for me.